Have you ever wanted to just leave behind the heaviness of life and start over somewhere completely new, an unknown in a new town with new possibilities? Well, that's just what James Taylor did in his early career. In 1966, James Taylor left McLean Mental Hospital and landed in Greenwich Village, where he lived until he barely escaped some of his darkest moments. He soon headed for London in 1967, with his struggles following close behind. Shortly after, he signed with the Beatles' Apple Records. When that fell apart, he ended up in Los Angeles, where he became part of the vibrant Laurel Canyon music scene in 1969. He is one of the few artists to have lived in all three influential music scenes in the 60s. He would soon become part of a tight-knit music community with artists such as Joni Mitchell and Carole King. Here, James does some soul-searching and finishes a song that reflects on his darkest days that will later make it on the top 100 songs of the century. And to add to that, while Carole King was playing piano during the recording, she is inspired to write a song of her own as a reaction to one of his lines that will go on to earn them both a Grammy in 1972. This is a story of resilience over despair. To understand how this unfolded, we must go back to visit all three places in time, as James Taylor's struggles overwhelm him while pushing through to follow his musical aspirations. When 17-year-old James Taylor called his younger sister from his boarding school, he didn't know if he would make it through the night. He no longer had the will to go on as depression took over his life. It was a familiar feeling, but this time he was desperate for help. She convinced him not to give up and seek professional help. Soon, a psychiatrist recommended he check into McLean Mental Hospital. He earned his high school diploma from the Associated Private School for Teens with Psychiatric Conditions. He said of his time there, "My days were full and I kept busy. That's what I needed in my life. Otherwise, I would have too much time to think too much. And sometimes too much thinking isn't good for you." In 1966, he ended up in the Village in New York, following his dream of becoming a singer-songwriter. He formed the Flying Machine with his friend Danny Korchmar, also known as Cooch, where they played songs he wrote about his time at McLean. Despite making decent headways, he was plagued by self-doubt while playing in coffee houses alongside up-and-comers like the Turtles. It's here where he is hanging out with a crowd of less desirables and picks up a substance habit, which turns into a full-blown addiction. That only fueled his lifelong battle with depression amid the intensity and uncertainty of an aspiring music career. Here, his loneliness amplified his sense of vulnerability. He often played in Washington Square Park while using until he passed out. He allowed addicts and runaways to stay at his apartment paid for by his parents. Speaking of this period, he said, "I just fell into it, since it was as easy to get high in the Village as to get a drink." Until one night, after a desperate plea for help, when his father drove straight from North Carolina and picked him up and drove him and his belongings back home. But before long, he was restless and packed up for London, still in search of his music career. In 1967, in the midst of the swinging London era, he moved to Notting Hill and once again began singing on the streets for money. It's here where he starts picking up new ideas from other struggling musicians as he explores his curiosities as an unknown in a new place. He began playing regularly in pubs and cafes along Portobello Road. He later recalled in Rolling Stone, "I wanted to perform, I wanted to write songs, and I wanted to get a lot of chicks." And by all accounts, he did just that. Robert Katz, a former Mercury Polydor executive, said of the time, "Records were selling as fast as we put them in the stores. When we signed somebody, sometimes we put him in the studio the same day and stuck a microphone in front of him and recorded an album within a few days. It was the wildest time ever in music. When James Taylor came to London, it was a gimme that he'd get signed. He was different from most other artists. He liked to work hard. Sure, he was a bit messed up, but so was everybody else. James contacts his friend Kutch from the village, who had been in town working as a session guitarist. It was around this time that the Beatles began recruiting artists for Apple Records, taking out full-page recruitment ads. They became inundated with everyone under the sun looking for an opportunity.
Please lock me away.
Peter Asher was also in charge of helping recruit new talent. Since Kutch had opened for Peter and Gordon with his former band the King Bees during the British invasion, he stayed in contact with Asher. He puts James in contact with Peter, and things quickly began to progress. They hit it off right away, and Peter likes James' demo, telling him, "Most likely we'll sign you because you deserve a chance to record your music. It's good." He then recommends James Taylor to Paul McCartney, and they sign him immediately as the first American recording artist of Apple Records. But little does Peter or James know that Apple Records is completely mismanaged and about to hit serious financial hardships. Not to mention that the Beatles are barely able to stand being in the same room with one another, leading to chaos within the business. John Lennon describes the situation. "We knew right away there would be lots of problems when we formed Apple because there was already so much tension among us. But we lived in denial and did it anyway. The atmosphere was very unpleasant to be around. I avoided going there as much as possible because I knew that if I'd went, I'd only argue with the other lads." The Beatles were in the midst of recording the White Album while James began recording his album at Trident Studios, as he had to work around their schedules. He sat in several of their sessions and became friendly with Paul and George. It's during this time that he's recording Something in the Way She Moves that George Harrison picks up one of his lines for his newly inspired song that would go on to be one of the greatest Beatles songs of all time, Something.
Something in the way she moves, or looks my way. Something in the way she moves.
McCartney and an uncredited Harrison guested on Carolina in My Mind, whose lyric, "Holy host of others standing around me," referred to the Beatles.
With a holy host of others standing around me.
His first album, titled James Taylor, is recorded with little to no frills at his own request. During the recording sessions, Taylor fell back into his old drug habit. He underwent treatment in a British program, returned to New York and was hospitalized there, and then finally committed himself to the Austin Riggs Center in Massachusetts. He later recalls of his condition, "It's an inseparable part of my personality that I have these feelings." Meanwhile, Apple released his debut album James Taylor in December '68 in the UK, and then in February '69 in the US. Critical reception was generally positive. Rolling Stone said, "This album is the coolest breath of fresh air I've inhaled in a good long while. It knocks me out."
Just knocking around the zoo.
However, the album's potential lagged from Taylor's inability to promote it because of his hospitalization and also because of the Apple's financial issues with marketing, and it sold poorly. Carolina in My Mind was released as a single and reached 118 on the US charts. Once he left treatment, James moved to Laurel Canyon, where he fell for Joni Mitchell. He says of the time, "It really was a perfect moment, that Laurel Canyon period. Carole lived up there. Joni and I lived in her house for the better part of a year. The record companies were relatively benign, and there were people in them who cared about the music and the artists. It hadn't become a corporate monolith yet. There was a sense of there being a community. Myself, Jackson Browne, Joni Mitchell, Carole King, Crosby, Stills and Nash. David Geffen was in the mix a lot. Linda Ronstadt, Peter Asher, Harry Nilsson. You know, it was pretty much what they say. Things really worked well." In July 1969, James headlined a 6-night stand at the Troubadour in Los Angeles. He was signed to Warner Brothers in October. In December 1969, He held the recording sessions at Sunset Sound Studios for his second album titled Sweet Baby James, featuring Carole King on piano. One of the songs he recorded during the session he had finished writing recently while reflecting on the hardships he had endured during his short 21 years. The song is Fire and Rain. It is inspired by 3 painful experiences, including his time in the Village and London when he was under the spell of substance abuse, fueling his severe battle with depression, including the period with the band The Flying Machine. The second was about a friend he knew during this time, Suzanne Schnurr, who was also an addict. While he was in London after recording his first album for Apple, he found out about her death at her own hands. Friends back home, concerned that it might distract James from being able to complete his album, kept the news from him, and he found out about 6 months later. He describes the heartsick feeling as he pleads to Jesus to see him through another day. He references both Suzanne and flying machines dashed to pieces on the ground in the song. And the last he said was about going into treatment. He describes Fire and Rain like this: "It's just a hard time song, the blues without having the blues format."
Just yesterday morning, they let me know you were gone. Suzanne plans.
The melancholy Fire and Rain perfectly captured the post-60s mood that haunted many who experienced loss while coming to grips with their own personal despair. The song's gentle guitar, set against the aching vocals, evoke feelings of sorrow while pleading for help, turning Taylor's deeply personal story into a universal reflection of gloom after the sunny days of the 60s they never thought would end.
I've seen fire and I've seen rain. I've seen sunny days.
The singer-songwriter movement was underway. From that point on, concept songs began to shift from the abstract world to the inner world, with the cultural focus of songwriting about personal struggles. The idealism and world-changing ambitions of the peace and love era began to give way to songs about inner change. The earthy song reflected James' own laid-back style and personality. Broadcast Music ranked Fire and Rain at number 82 on its top 100 songs of the century list, while it's consistently on the top songs of all time despite who's making the list and when. But it's while James and Carole are in the studio recording Fire and Rain when he sings the line, "I seen lonely times when I could not find a friend," that Carole King gets inspired and begins working on a song of her own for her new album. According to James, Carole told him the song was a response to the line in his song.
I seen lonely times when I could not find a friend.
Carole recorded You've Got a Friend during the January 1971 recording sessions for her album Tapestry, when James Taylor was also recording his new album Mudslide Slim and the Blue Horizon. She said that the song was as close to pure inspiration as I've ever experienced. The song wrote itself. It was written by something outside myself, through me.
I'll be there. You've got a friend.
She said James heard it and really liked it and wanted to record it. Clearly the song touched something in him, proof of how music can become a kind of medicine when we need it most. Both Carole and James won Grammy Awards for the song. James Taylor won Best Male Vocal Pop Performance, while Carole King won Song of the Year at the 1972 Grammy Awards. The song became a reflection of James Taylor and Carole King's friendship that has lasted ever since. They've supported each other both professionally and personally. They've both endured horrific pain and struggles, but their friendship has stayed consistent through it all. The song is a great reminder that a simple, kind gesture can mean the world to somebody else. You've Got a Friend provides hope amid turmoil as James Taylor warns the weary listener.
Oh, soul, if you let them. Oh, yeah, but don't you let them.
James Taylor's Sweet Baby James and Carole King's Tapestry were immediately hailed as masterpieces, capturing the introspective spirit of a generation. Both albums became cultural touchstones, cementing the singer-songwriter era. One song is an expression of how music can express pain, and the other a way to uplift someone when they need it most.
And you know wherever I am, I'll come running.
Finding the band was an operation. I don't remember who introduced James or I first to Carole. Possibly Cooch, I don't know. But we met her and loved everything about her. Her songs, her piano playing, her persona, you know.
The feeling was real electric between them. Carole was obviously excited, and if you can imagine James' subdued nature being electric, it was.
First of all, you can ask me about James anytime because I love him so much. It's that real, you know, everybody says, were you a couple? No. You know, do you ever think about it? No. The first connection was musical.
It turned out we spoke the same language. We sat down and we slipped back into the mother tongue, really. It was great. We played on each other's records. We just had a common mind, you know.
They're very different. They're very different. Carole is kind of the earth mother, Jewish mother kind of babe. James is kind of an ascetic, Protestant vicar kind of guy in a way, although they're both hilarious in different ways. It's the contrast that really is what makes it so entertaining, and maybe always has.
Let me know what you think in the comments. And if you want to see the video with the full music experience, then please consider joining my Patreon for exclusive content while supporting my work. Thanks for watching. See you next video.